Welcome back to the 244th episode of the Daily Flip podcast. I'm your host, Alex, and today we're going to be flipping through some of our top stories, including the arguments that Apple is making and how they may fall flat in their antitrust suit. A raging MAGA person is ridiculed by the media. What else would we expect? And a interesting article saying that the GOP is a national security threat. That one we have some commentary on broadly rather than the article because it's kind of short and meaningless. And we can't forget that we will end today with our Daily Delight, a story meant to leave you feeling positive, ready to take on the day. Now, that's enough rambling from me. Let's jump into the Daily Debate. Do you see Mr. Biden, President Biden's antitrust streak, this new antitrust trend that he's bringing back with Amazon, Google, Apple? Do you see this as a good thing? Do you see this as a bad thing? I want to know everybody's opinions. We haven't seen a lot of antitrust stuff for a while now, at least not a major prosecution of multiple companies, or at least an entire sector, because this is the internet sector, for quite some time. So, is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Let me know your opinions. And, of course, we're going to jump into our first article, which will detail more. So then you can have a comment after that if you so please. So, as I was talking about, this article comes from the American Conservative, and the headline reads, Apple should not be exempt from antitrust tomahawk. And that's probably an interesting one for the American Conservative, or at least on name alone. Some people are going to say, whoa, okay, hey, a conservative organization coming after businesses. And the American Conservative, a little bit more mainstream. You're not looking at your American Economic Institute of Research. You're not looking at them. They're going to be very, very free market. They're going to say, hey, if Apple is doing everything at least semi-right, that they're actually trying to protect their own technology. They're trying to help their customers. They're to have their customers' best interest in mind. People want to buy it. People want to pay for it. People want to stay in the ecosystem. Whatever argument they would want to use, they would probably be more on the side of it. But the American Conservative is going to be that Washington. They're going to be the middle of the road saying, okay, hey, we have these principles about the free market, but we also understand that if a company gets too large and they're actually excluding other people from entering into the free market, then that is going to be a vulnerability. That is going to be a failure of said market. And I'm sorry if I'm reverting back into my old economics talk. Antitrust, we haven't really touched on this one for a while. I think the last one we did was Google. We didn't really touch on the Amazon stuff that much because I really didn't find it that interesting. And to be honest, I don't find the Apple stuff the most interesting thing in the world, because at the end of the day, I have mixed opinions. I think, yes, the green bubble phenomenon and the limiting of the type of information that can be sent over those messages, whether it's photos, videos, I do think that is something that needs to be remedied, but that doesn't mean that you can't have messages come across as green versus blue. I think actually that's just a preference, and that's just indicating, okay, hey, this is in our own system. It's like having WhatsApp and having a Facebook message. Facebook messages look different than WhatsApp messages. WhatsApp messages look different than Ringo, I think is the other one, or Rango. I used that one back in the day. And they look different than iMessages. So if you're decreasing functionality between the two services, then I think there's actually a little bit of an argument there. And maybe, I believe it's RAS is there's a new type of technology that Google has been trying to implement, and it's not the same as MSS. I think it's actually is it RSS? DSS? I have to do a little bit more research into it. But the point being that it is actually encrypted. It is something that can be used broader band. It doesn't have to be between two Android phones. And Apple could integrate that technology, or at least have a functionality option so that people who are sending Android can send higher bandwidth, or sending from an Android can send higher bandwidth information to iPhone users. So then the actual quality and the perceived quality on the other end doesn't get degraded, while still having a demarcator saying that, hey, this is coming from a service that Apple did not create and does not have dominion over, versus a option of the blue bubbles that Apple has cultivated, that they have, everything is running on their server, all the data is going through Apple. And I think that's going to open up some weird loopholes or some weird questions. So wait, if something gets breached between an Android and Apple phone, and that encryption gets breached, does Apple get blamed? Does Android get blamed? Or is it the people that are running this new, I think, like I said, I'm going to just run with the fact that it's RSS. I could very well be wrong with the abbreviation, but it is actually more of a secure, open message that is being developed by lots of different people in order to solve part of this problem, because we've known that SMS has had a very big vulnerability for quite some time. And then what if it happens with the blue bubbles? Because if the blue bubbles get, how should I say, if they get broken into, hacked, if that data gets leaked, that is solely on Apple. So having this demarcation, having this split between the two systems would open up some interesting questions for sure about the nature of data breaches that may come in the future. But I think that, like I said, that's a mixed question, and it doesn't ever want to be that simple, because antitrust is trying to say, hey, this is XYZ, this is our case, we have to have it like this. The federal government saying the market is America. Apple's arguing, no, the market is the broader world. We're not just competing here in America. And all of these different sides are going to take their lines in the sand, and we can't have a nuanced discussion, and that's probably not going to happen until the judge comes out and says, hey, maybe this could be the case, maybe that will be the case, so on and so forth. But I've been rambling on long enough about my opinions. Let's jump into the article. Quote, in its response to the lawsuit, Apple fell back on the same argument that it has used for more than a decade, that user privacy and security require the company to have total control over the ecosystem. The argument is unfounded. As policymakers, courts, and individual Apple users alike strive to counteract big tech's anti-competitive tendencies, they should recognize that protecting user data and privacy is much more feasible than any corporation's claim, and that openness, privacy, and security are not incompatible with values. And I think that there's some basis to some of these arguments. So I was listening to a podcast the other day, and the wallet app is a huge contentious thing. That, hey, Apple is saying that you can only use our wallet app, and the people who are on the other side are like, whoa, hey, what if I want to have my own wallet app? What if I want to put it on the developer store? What if I want to give it to Apple users? It's actually better. All the cards are in one app, but it has one card that actually gets registered. So even if somebody gets the fake numbers or gets the information from your transaction, it's just the front card that you're using to channel all the other money through in the app or whatever. And I think that's a really interesting argument, but the whole underlying thing here is, and the reason that Apple can make at least some sort of claim to it is, the RFID chip that you actually tap when you go to a store and you're using Apple Pay to pay. They actually would have to have access to that chip in the wallet, in the wallet that's being imported onto the Apple iOS system, in order to be able to pay with those cards that is in that app. And guess what? An RFID chip can be vulnerable to outside attacks. So if a bad actor wanted to make a whole bunch of Apple phones vulnerable, they could, I'm not saying they would, but I'm saying, maybe a popular wallet comes out, somehow gets breached, somehow there's an error in the code where it actually allows a scammer to come up and scan and register the unique identification number, whatever the special characteristics of that chip are, and then from there they could actually use that in a malicious way. Let's be clear, I am not a bad actor. I'm also not the greatest tech genius of our generation. I have some passing knowledge, a little bit more than passing knowledge, but maybe not as much as a lot of people, especially in the tech industry. But it's a genuine question as to whether or not this would open up vulnerabilities. And then you have to ask the question, well, hey, is it Apple's fault? Is it the wallet's fault? Well, the wallet created the breach, but Apple gave them access to the chip. I think that if Apple was going to be brutally honest and they didn't want to just go with the security argument, because that sounds great to the public. Oh, we're worried about user security. This is basically a pitch the entire time they're in court. Oh, this is about the user security. We want Apple to be a secure network. And some people who are growing up in this time, if they win the case, they're like, well, Apple, made this whole argument about security. They actually won the case based on it. Obviously, they're very secure. And remember the California disaster where there was a phone of a criminal that was taken, and then Apple wouldn't actually break the encryption, so the authorities couldn't actually get the information off the phone. I think eventually the authorities did crack it without Apple's help, but that I could be remembering that part wrong. But the point being that this is a staple of Apple security. So they can say, hey, this is precedent. We've been using this claim for a long time. And also it can be a giant reminder, hey, we are the security firm. But if they want to be very practical and they don't necessarily want to use that argument, I think they could in maybe closed door sessions, because maybe they don't want it coming out. They could say, we just don't want to open ourselves up to liability. If anything happens wrong within the Apple ecosystem, it falls on us. We want to be responsible for the problem. We don't want these vulnerabilities that other apps and other parties can bring into our system that could be partially attributed to us. If there's going to be anybody to blame, it's going to be Apple, and we're going to solve it. And that takes on a lot of risk. And let's be clear, I'm not there in Tim Cook's head. I don't know. But if I had to speculate, this is part of the rationale that Apple wants to, one, limit those vulnerabilities, but also they don't want this huff-a-scuffle of, they don't want a third party coming in and having a problem and then negative publicity coming down on Apple. If there's going to be a mistake, it will be all on Apple, and then they'll do what they always do. Oh, well, some users ran into this particular, like when the Bend Gate was happening, they were like, oh, well, some users ran into this issue. We will be addressing it as it comes up. They didn't do a massive recall. So Apple, of course, it doesn't necessarily take accountability either. I'm not trying to pretend like, oh, they're taking on all the accountability themselves. I mean, the attempt to is more that, hey, we don't want to open it up to third parties doing something that could have us held liable, and therefore we're going to keep on going with the security argument. Well, guess what? Third-party developers have not been liking it for a long time. We remember the Epic Games suit. They don't like the amount of control that Apple has, and now the federal government's looking at it and saying, yeah, Apple, that ecosystem of yours, it is beautiful. You're right. Users do like the idea that you can have a completely integrated system. I can copy and paste on my phone, and then I copy and paste it onto my computer, and then copy and paste it onto my iPad. And let's be clear, I haven't tried it with my watch. Maybe if I copy and paste with my watch, it'll show up on my phone or my iPad or my computer, so on and so forth. And not even that, between two computers. I have a really old MacBook. Well, not really old, but old enough that it's just barely holding on to the new updates, and you can copy and paste on that thing, and you can send it over to the new work laptop. Yeah, because Apple has an integrated system. People really do like that. They do like some of the features. You can use your phone as your webcam on your computer. I don't know many people that do it, but I'm sure there are people that are out there that like it, and I'm sure, just like me, they were fascinated when it first happened, and they were experimenting and saying, hey, this could actually be a useful tool. Your iPad can be a second monitor to your computer, and people like that. Now, do all of those features mean necessarily that Apple has to dissuade, put in practices that actually hamper other people from coming in and doing the same thing? No, not necessarily. They can just argue on the merits that, hey, this is our competitive advantage. This ecosystem is something that you'll love as an Apple user. And there can be other products that are out there that work okay with Apple that still integrate through Bluetooth maybe, but they don't have the same handoff possibilities, because guess what? Maybe there's a virus on my iPad. And let's be clear, it's a little bit more complicated. It's Bluetooth handoff kind of thing. But maybe there's a virus on my iPad, or let's say I have a Samsung tablet. Maybe there's a virus on my Samsung tablet because it's not owned by Apple. There is software that Apple didn't create. So by opening it up and allowing you to share files between them, maybe there's a vulnerability there. And I think, let's be clear, Apple could be taking, how should I say, advantage of our understanding of things as novice. There's no doubt about that. And obviously the federal government thinks there's that to some degree. But my point being with all of it is they should not be able to outright say, no, your product will not work with the Samsung. Guess what? Your products can very well work with the Samsung. You can still connect over personal hotspot. You can still send photos and videos over a cord or using a different third-party app like Dropbox that can operate on both systems. They're not completely excluding them. And guess what? The ecosystem, the thing that they're being ridiculed for because all of these things work so well together and they're so, what's the word I'm looking for? Intimately intertwined with one another that they are causing some exclusionary looking policies. And sure, maybe some of them actually are. The wallet thing maybe actually could be because they're completely saying, no, this type of product is not allowed on the Apple platform. It's not allowed in the App Store, so on and so forth. But it doesn't have to be a complete black and white. Some of these other things, some of these other issues that could arise from having the integration to the exact same degree as Apple has, it could open up vulnerabilities. I wonder if there's any possible vulnerabilities between having to copy and paste on your Samsung or copy on your Samsung and then paste it on your MacBook. I wonder if there is actually a vulnerability there. Maybe not, maybe so, but even then, you don't have to necessarily say, hey, Samsung's allowed to have all these features because this is something that Apple has. It's not necessarily an unfair practice when to be able to do some of these things, you would probably have to have access to proprietary Apple information. You would have to have some sort of extra knowledge about how an Apple computer works. You would have to have some integral knowledge of the coding. You would have to have some idea of this proprietary technology, or at least some possible proprietary knowledge about the tech, the coding, so on and so forth, in order to make some of these features work. Now, if there's no proprietary technology there, then yes, they should be able to open it up to everything else. But if it's something that, hey, we don't want to disclose this because it's our intellectual property, maybe we should respect intellectual property, then I think that some of those arguments are going to fall flat on their face. I think the argument about the wallet is going to be a contentious one for sure. I think that the message one is not necessarily the most drastic. I think it's pretty darn solvable, but then again, I'm a novice. I am an ignorant little man who doesn't know anything about technology, so on and so forth. And I think the one that holds the most weight is the Apple Store third-party apps. It's an interesting claim for sure. The idea that, well, hey, this is a platform, a publishing platform that I know that's kind of actually, when it comes to 230, those are contradictory terms. Section 230 of the Internet Decency Act, but the Communications Decency Act, sorry. But my point being there that, are they a publisher? Are they a platform? Are they platforming apps for Apple, or are they publishing apps for Apple? That will be a very contentious one. Is Apple just limiting the type of, how should I say? Is it actually limiting the users that are allowed, how the users are allowed to use their phones by limiting the apps, but also are they stifling competition. I think that one will hold a lot of weight because stifling competition is the one thing that antitrust cares about the most. And also, especially nowadays, in the age of internet companies, innovation is a big talking point. I think that will hold a lot of weight going in here. The argument that Apple's market is global versus the US only. Of course, this is always the first argument that everybody makes in antitrust, which is you are looking at our market too narrowly. Just like I believe when it was Office Depot and Office Max or Office Depot and Staples, there was a merger between two of the three large companies that do office supplies, and they were arguing, hey, well, no, you're looking at our market too narrowly. And this is a case study I did in high school. They were saying, hey, no, you're looking at the market too narrowly. We're not just competing against other office stores, we're competing against Walmart, Target, and Amazon wasn't necessarily a thing yet. It wasn't as prominent, but the argument today could be made, well, we're trying to fight back against Amazon. And I think all of those claims are very real here. And I think Apple has a good claim to say, hey, our market is broader than the United States. But I think that it falls a little bit because when you go overseas, a lot of people use WhatsApp and third-party apps anyway to communicate because they're not just communicating with people in their own country, especially the EU. They're communicating with people throughout the EU. So guess what? Telecom infrastructure may be a little bit different. They need something that's always going to work as long as there's internet, there's WeChat in China, there's other apps like that already circumvent the messaging issue between Apple and Android. So I think that if they go with the broader world market, it may not actually serve their case 100% because this idea, a lot of people in the US don't use third-party apps. They use the native messaging app for the most part, unless it's like Slack for company stuff. And some people still use like WeChat or Facebook Messenger, I guess, is a pretty popular one. A lot of people use social media to DM each other, sure. But I think that it's going to be hard to argue that this issue is not something that's predominantly found in the US, and therefore at least the market for that issue is going to be national. Whereas, like I said, Apple will probably still say, hey, no, we're international when it comes to market share. There are so many other alternatives. There's so many cheaper alternatives in phones around the world. It's only here in America that we have a competitive edge, and that's just because people can afford us, and that's because people like our products. You're going to hear a lot of those types of arguments. Sorry, I went on a really long rant about this antitrust. I was all over the place. Some of you are going to be saying, whoa, your RFID point, that doesn't make any sense. Tell me where I'm wrong on that. They're going to say, hey, well, your market definition, it's complete crud. Sure. Definitely call me out on that one. I may have to brush up on the specifics. I don't know the elasticity or inelasticity of smartphones or Apple phones in the United States, like how willing other people are to switch to something else. I don't know those rates off the top of my head. All of those things will come out throughout the antitrust suit, so maybe we can get more information then. But wherever you want to nitpick, take it apart, put it down there in the comment section. Love to hear what everybody has to say, and maybe I'll even respond, especially if it's a question or like pushing back against something. I got a comment the other day that was just like, yes, this, I don't care about this. I'm like, okay, great. I don't know how to respond because I don't want to sit there and completely adore somebody else's opinion besides just saying like, hey, thank you. Thank you for commenting. That's probably what I literally, after I get done with this, I'm going to go say thank you for commenting because I haven't done it in the last day. But he seemed like a person who was very passionate. Let's put it that way. So let's jump to our second article. And this one comes from PolitiZoom. Raging MAGA is straight out of Orwell's 2 minutes of hate or 2 minute hate. So the thing that they're highlighting here, the 2 minute hate, is in 1984. There's 2 minutes a day, basically, where people are allowed to let out their rage against people who are disastrous, who are destroying the country, against Eurasia, so on and so forth. And I think it's an interesting analogy, especially because they go on to say that it's basically what Trump has been doing from the very beginning. They're saying that Trump rallies are just a way to hate on the American system, and maybe there's moments of that, but I think maybe now it's maybe a little bit more that way because he's ranting and railing against people, but before, he was still ranting and railing against people, but he would always talk about a positive vision. And I think there's still underlying positive visions of America. If you watch the whole thing through and not just the parts that make it out on social media, the parts that are, sensationalist, then you could actually say, no, he still has somewhat of he's saying that, hey, this is a dark time in America, but there is a little bit of hope. I am the hope. So he's kind of taking that on, and he's kind of being arrogant about it. No doubt about that. But I think that this idea that it's all just hate, that's only because the clips that get shown are all the ones that are going to get hate, that are meant to rile everybody up. So I think it's not necessarily wrong that there are certain points where it does inspire this sort of primal energy within people, but sometimes that's even hopeful energy, and there's cheering and there's love and 4 more years. And maybe some people are saying it in anger. I think a lot of people are saying it in hope, and they see Donald Trump, or if they're conservatives in general, that this new iteration of the conservative movement that is drawing on populism is actually able to get a more conservative agenda into the office. Maybe I'm rationalizing. Maybe I'm just trying to push back against this author for no good reason, because I feel like they have a deep vitriol in their hearts. But I think they've misdiagnosed some things. And the reason I have how should I say it, a less than kind interpretation of what this author is saying is because within the first paragraph, just seeing the muscle on his face contort will raise a normal person's blood pressure. The person that is mentioned in this video who is angry, I couldn't find the original video. They don't actually link to it as far as I'm aware. I went through some of the tweets that they posted afterwards in order to find the original video, and I couldn't. Maybe I'm just incompetent when it comes to finding this stuff. But the next thing they say in the next line is, quote, when Hillary Clinton spoke of the deplorables, she may have had a fellow like this in mind. Although I think he's way beyond deplorable. He's despondent, dismayed, and above all else, discombobulated. And let's be clear. Yes, I didn't see the initial video. Sure. That you're just you're just calling people deplorables. You're just calling them not worthy of being seen as another citizen because they're angry, they're yelling. Sure, you can call him a whole bunch of things, and maybe he actually is a deplorable human being. But then when you say it like Hillary Clinton said it, and you say it and use that specific analogy and say, when she said this, which everybody hated her for and was seen across the entire right-wing media and even some moderate people as a condescending elitist comment, and then you fully endorse it, you wonder why MAGA people get angry when they are talked down to by certain people on the left. That doesn't mean, and let's be clear, we're not talking about victim culture where, obviously if they're being talked down to, they are the ones who are speaking the truth and we need to prop them up. No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is when you talk down to somebody, guess what? They're probably not going to respond in a good way. They should respond. Just because someone talks down to you does not mean you have the right to be a bitty, as my mom probably would have said back in the day. But also, you should be aware that that's probably the response that they're going to give you. And I've fallen prey to this myself. I have been less than cordial sometimes, but we should all aim to be above the people that talk down to us, because at the end of the day, we have to be the bigger person. You should be the bigger person. And I'm pretty sure this guy is the bigger person in this situation, which is why he's probably a little bit scary. But the point being that the author comes in with a lot of derision and obvious hate for one, or not hate, disdain. I like that word. It's simple, yet says a lot. Disdain for one side of the aisle. Then again, he is also wearing a Q shirt, so he is probably a little bit further out there than a majority of the population. The lefties would probably want to argue, even some mainstream Republicans would want to argue that Q is a bigger movement than it actually is. I've met some Q people in my day. There was an interesting time when I was out knocking doors. She was a lovely person. She was very kind. But there's this complex of, hey, I know the truth. I've seen behind the curtains. I've looked on the different social media, on the Telegram posts, and I know. And they're like, Okay, you're gonna come out for the 2023. Okay, great, thank you. You have more. Uh, okay, hey, yeah. Oh, I definitely hear where you're coming from, man. That turned out to be like a 30-minute conversation, and I've met some reformed Q people, and they are not, the numbers of Q people are not as prominent as anybody who would like to claim they are. So. But that doesn't mean that they don't exist, and it doesn't mean that they don't have some crazy out there opinions that you kind of just have to nod your head and be like, or you have to say, I don't know about that one, Chief. And then they go into a 30-minute rant. They're like, oh, I promise you. I'm like, well, I pushed back. I did my job here, which is trying to push back on you. And you're obviously pointing out where your argument kind of falls apart a little bit. And you didn't actually care. And you kind of just kept going on. So I'm not going to try any longer. I'm not going to try to reform you. That's not my job here. But whatever. Yeah, that is what it is. Sorry, I went on a rant about Q there for a little bit. It's just the Q community is not as prominent as a lot of people think, but there are some people in it who are quite out there. I knew another one. No, never mind. We're not going to go into that story either. So let's jump into our final article that comes from Daily Costs. GOP has become a national security threat. I'm going to make this a really, really quick one because it's honestly not even the article itself. And, well, I take that back. It is the article itself, but it's mainly the headline caught me. But then I was kind of frustrated when I went through the article and they were saying, the people who are against Ukraine against funding Ukraine more tend to be a little bit more Republican, and Russian intelligence from Russia has shown that Vladimir Putin wants to mix the messages and embolden this group that is not for Ukraine funding. Therefore, GOP equals national security threat. That also, there's a few things baked in there, which is within our national security for Ukraine to be a free country from Russia, which you could argue that our foreign policy, it makes sense and is advantageous for us on the foreign policy stage, and maybe them having control over a lot of the grain fields wouldn't necessarily be great. Guess what? We are the second or third largest producer of grain. Do we actually need the Ukrainian bread belt? Maybe not, maybe so. I think that could be an interesting national security argument. But to simply imply that not supporting Ukraine and having Ukraine lose is a national security threat, unless Ukraine was right on our border. If Ukraine was right on our border, and if it was right there against the United States, and a country was invading them, let's just make it this way. A country's invading Mexico, and the dictator or the authoritarian leader is hostile to America. You could argue that by not supporting the Mexican government who is fighting back against this dictator, there are genuine national security implications because it could be a staging point for attacks against the United States. Having a hostile country right on the border is against our national security interest. I think you could make a similar argument with having Vladimir Putin closer to NATO countries, because we would be necessarily pulled into some of the wars if Article 5 was invoked. But I think it's a lot more tenuous, and it's not just a simple, yes, this equals national security threat if you don't back this up. I don't think it's that simple. It is not the same situation as I pointed out there with Mexico to the south, that they got invaded. It's along the same lines, but it's nowhere close to the exact same situation. And I think you kind of have to stretch to get there. And that's why I'm frustrated with the headline, because some people aren't going to even read. Some people are going to trust the Daily Costs because, let's be clear, the Daily Costs, whether I like them or not, and whether I agree with them or not, and that may cause me to doubt some of their reporting, for people who already have a certain worldview, and they do back up a lot of their statements, or at least they don't actively try to lie. Maybe they buy into some narratives. Maybe they have their own narrative that they're trying to run with, and they're interpreting the facts how they see them, but I don't actively see them trying to lie most of the time. And if you're already bought in on that side, you're just going to read the headline, because a lot of people just read the headline or read the byline, and then they're going to move on. Oh, yep, the GOP has been GOP has become a national security threat. A lot of people can take that at face value. They're just saying, oh, that's the author saying that. Some people may read that as, oh, they've been declared a national security threat. Oh, there's an expert who's calling them that. So I think it's an irresponsible headline. But then again, who am I to say? Daily cost, you do you. If you just want to make everybody on one side of the aisle who reads your stuff, all the progressives, believe that you really have some legitimate evidence here to say that the GOP is a national security threat, and you're not really stretching in order to get to that point, go right ahead. I'm just not going to endorse it. I'm going to call it out when I see it if I can. All right, so with all the negative stuff out of the way, let's jump into our daily delight. This one comes from Parade Pets. Lucky Golden Retriever is born with green fur, and it is breathtaking. And honestly, I'm not going to read too much from here because I do want you to go read it. It's a very interesting article because I was like, wait, green fur, where does it come from? So apparently the mother had a bile issue that caused the puppy's skin to be dyed, or sorry, not skin, the hair to be dyed. In a few months, the new hair will grow in. It won't be a big deal. The puppy's fine. They tell you that towards the end of the article, but I was searching for it when I started. I was like, wait, are they going to be like a mutant baby? What's going on? Was the bile like infused in their cells or something? No, but they'll be fine. And if you want to see the cute photos of this guy who's going to make it out okay, there's some links within this article, or if you want to read any of today's articles, there's a link in the description below that like and subscribe button. Also down there, you can find the podcast on Spotify, Pocket Cast, Google Podcasts, as well as Podvine, and the Twitter handle at @DailyFlip, where I post a Twitter tirade every Tuesday and Thursday. So with all that said, there's only one more thing to say. Stay safe, don't die.